Good evening, everyone. Just going to wait for Kenny to get in. It's good to see you all this evening. Thank you for joining us for our May version of Be More Human. Welcome, Kenny. Glad you're in. So, as you all know, we have continued a Be More Human series event each month, beginning in September. And this month is our last one for this program year, but you have to watch and see what we'll be doing next year after the summer is over. We, again, have been sponsored by In the Loop, and I have been able to be a part of the planning team for the Be More Human series. My name is Deborah McCackern. I'm a pastor at Hunting Ridge Presbyterian Church. I wanted to just make sure that you knew that our event this month is tonight and tomorrow night, so 2 nights in a row. And we will have a chance to learn from 4 members of our Presbyterian family who trace their roots to different parts of the world. Identifying as people of color, our panelists will dig into the immigrant experiences of structural and individual racism in this country. This is going to be a very interesting opportunity for us to learn from them, and we look forward to hearing what they have to say. This evening, I'd like to ask that we begin our time together with a moment of silence and then a brief reading of scripture. Lord, prepare our hearts and our ears for what we will hear this night. I want to read to you from the Message paraphrase of the scriptures, which actually is written by a Presbyterian pastor, Reverend Eugene Peterson, who was the founding pastor at Christ Our King Presbyterian Church right here in Baltimore Presbytery. He has written the entire scriptures in a paraphrase, and I'd like to share with you from Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23. Listen for the word of the Lord. But what happens when we live God's way? He brings gifts into our lives, much the same way that fruit appears in an orchard. Things like affection for others, exuberance about life, serenity. We develop a willingness to stick with things, a sense of compassion in the heart, and a conviction that a basic holiness permeates things and people. We find ourselves involved in loyal commitments, not needing to force our way in life, able to marshal and direct our energies wisely. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. And now with great pride, I introduce to you Jannny Lora, who is a part of the Hunting Ridge Presbyterian Church family. Hi, Jannny.
Hi, Pastor Deborah. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see all of you here and to be here. My name is Jannny Lora. I'll be your moderator this evening. And I was born in the Dominican Republic. I am an author and a social media team leader for the government. And I'm very happy that we're all together tonight. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Maria Wong, who is a professor of psychology at Stevenson University. Maria?
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Maria Wong. I'm a professor of psychology at Stevenson University in Owings Mills. I'm very happy to be here to share with you my experience as an immigrant. I was born and raised in Hong Kong and came to Canada, went to Canada first, immigrated to Canada with my family when I was a teenager, and then came to the United States for graduate school and have been living here since then. I live with my husband and 2 daughters, and now I'm turning to Jose.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to see all of you spread across my screen. As many of you are familiar with me and I am familiar with you, My name is Jose Heriberto Lopez-Chapa, pastor here in the Presbytery. I am currently on staff at the Presbytery as the consultant to the Commission on Reconciliation. I also serve our lone Hispanic new worshiping community group called Comunidad Presbiteriana La Trinidad, located out of Anne Arundel County. And so it's a joy to be with you all, and I'll share more about my experience in the near future. So it's just an honor to participate and be with you all this evening. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Bolima Tafah. I'm a teacher. I work with DCPS, the District of Columbia Public Schools. I'm an elder at Hunting Ridge Presbyterian Church, and I'm originally from Cameroon. And I'm happy to be with you guys this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria, Bolima, and Jose. So we're going to start with some definitions before we get into the discussion, because you're going to hear us using certain terms, and we want to make sure everybody, the playing field is all leveled and we all know what we're referring to. So I'm going to share my screen. Can you all see my screen? So, of course, this is a BIPOC and racial justice discussion. And the first thing that you may be wondering, most of you may know already what does BIPOC stand for, and is Black, Indigenous, People of Color. The term BIPOC, in addition to be factually correct, it allows us to shift away from terms like minority and non-white, and it also places people in the correct category without generalizing as to everyone. We don't believe one title fits everyone, so BIPOCs allow for further inclusion. You also may hear us talk about diversity, and we have this great definition from the Morehouse University School of Medicine about what diversity is, and is the differences expressed by both internal and external characteristics of human beings. These differences include, but are not limited to, race, age, color, ethnicity, gender identity, gender and or expression, sexual orientation, religion, national origin, disability or ability status, veteran status, and socioeconomic background. Went the wrong way, sorry. Also, diversity also includes differences in backgrounds, ideas, thoughts, values, and beliefs. It encompasses principles of inclusion in services of creating a safe and supportive environment where differences are respected, valued, and celebrated. And this is why we're here. We're here to celebrate our differences and understand each other better. And then the last term that I wanted to define for you today is colorism. And colorism is defined as prejudice or discrimination against individuals with a dark skin tone, typically among people of the same ethnic or racial group. And this was some interesting statistics from the World Economic Forum and about colorism, and is how it's perpetuated by the global beauty industries, where sales of skin lightening products are projected to reach $8.9 billion by 2024. And this is a big problem, because you see that this is why, I don't know if any of you have been following, but you see this in Twitter a lot, where there's a lot of backlash when celebrities are sponsoring these lightening creams for people, because they promote an agenda that goes against acceptance of people. And studies have shown the existence of a wage gap linked to skin color. So it could be like two people, for example, two Black people, and one is lighter than the other, and that person will probably get paid more than the darker skinned person. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so we can begin our discussion. If you have any questions or anything, you can type it in the chat, and we'll address it at the end. But we're going to start with our first question. And our first question is, format for the panel is, tell me about your experiences with colorism, good and bad. How does colorism affect your culture as a whole? And do you consider it a big problem? Jose, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thank you, Jannny, for sharing those definitions to help us understand some basic terminology that we can apply to our conversation. So speaking on colorism, I'll give you a prime example. When I first announced to my family is originally from Mexico. I was the first one born here in the US. And most of my family is güero, somos güeros. We are light-skinned, as you can see. Güero means light-skinned. When I announced to my family, and it was shared through our family members, that I was marrying a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white girl from Denver, one of my aunts, who I love dearly, shared with my mom, and who shared with me. She said, thank God you're marrying a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white girl. You are bettering our family. And I was taken aback. I thought, oh my goodness. I mean, we're already, light-skinned and all that, but I just didn't think that would happen in my family. And yet it did. And so what she was referring to was, a very common idea in even in Latin Hispanic cultures, this idea of colorism. Hey, it's better if you have light skin, a light complexion, and if you marry or bring someone into the family that's lighter, you're helping the family. You're raising them up by bringing someone that's lighter into the family and bettering the gene pool and so on and so forth. And so, man, that's been a harsh reality. At the same time, I recognize my own sense of privilege, that because of my light skin, I am, another definition that we didn't name, Jannny, right, is passing. And passing is a term that is thrown or is used when it comes to colorism and skin complexion, because I've had this experience personally many, many times where people don't think I am Hispanic or Latino, and they don't think I speak Spanish. So I will stand next to somebody who's speaking, and then I'll start and they'll look at me funny like, you're Hispanic? ¿Hablas español? ¿De dónde eres? Where are you from? And I get that whole thing. So I recognize in myself that I have the privilege of this, that I don't have to be burdened, sadly, unfortunately, tragically, in our lives in society, by worrying about what color my skin tone is. And that's a harsh reality that people carry around, and it's unfortunate. But so I'm very aware of that, and I try to educate and share that as much as I can. But that's my personal experience with it. I think it comes in all kinds of different ways, but it definitely happens in Hispanic cultures, Latinx communities, and it happens in different kinds of ways. So, we'll get past it by educating ourselves and sharing with one another. So is there anyone else that would like to share more about that or their own experience?
I actually can jump into this one because this one's a really interesting one because you and I are in the different ends of the spectrum. Like I am like way on the darker side, and it's always interesting because in my country like the passing is a big thing, and so is the we all grew up with the whole better the race, give your children a quote unquote fighting chance, and one of the things that is always interesting to me is when in Dominican Republic, they have this, we are a mixture of three races. We are from African, Indigenous, and Spaniard. And we have people of all shades, but there are times when like, and they like to say Indio. And Indio is it's kind of like the indigenous shade of the skin. And that is it's the upgrade from being the darker one. So when they say, oh, like you hear people like, she's not black, she's Indian complexion. So that is actually, it's a sad reality, but it is very interesting. And sometimes it's kind of like, I smile because at this point in life is like, come on, man. But yeah, it's very sad because even like they will sometimes people, my own people, is like they can't believe that a darker person is Latina, and I'm like, you have the same dark complexion skin people in your country and in your race. Why is it so hard to believe that somebody's speaking Spanish? So that's very interesting. Maria or Bolima?
Yeah, sure. That's very interesting, and thank you for sharing. I would also share my experience as well. So I feel like I'm the only Asian in this room, but I want to emphasize that even though I'm an Asian, I do not represent all the Asians, right? Or all Asian Americans, because, you know, it is such a diverse group. So I can only speak for my own experience. And of course, there are overlaps, right, of our experiences. So I think for Chinese, from my understanding, right, of Chinese culture, there is this appreciation of a more fair, whiter skin tone. And there is an interesting intersection between the kind of like, you know, the color, and also class, so social economic status. And here's the reason why. Because traditionally, China is an agricultural society that a lot of people work on the farms. And imagine, right, you're working on the field 24/7, and of course you're going to get a darker skin tone. So it was seen that, you know, it was perceived that if you have a whiter skin tone, that means that you're coming from a rich family, that you don't have to work in the fields. And of course, you know, with the modern technology and you know, being a really, you know, rapidly changing society these days, right? It is not, you know, it is not the case anymore, right? You know, having a darker skin tone means that you work in a field. But I do think that there's still this perception that people buy into, that if you're whiter, you are better, or it becomes the beauty standard. And I appreciate, Jannny, that you put in the slide about the beauty products, because that was huge in Asian market, that it is really a, you know, a business that brings in, you know, billions and billions of dollars.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My experience with colorism, probably what I want to say is I might not have experienced this directly, or I might have, or it might have happened to me, but I just choose to give a blind eye to it. But my experience with colorism, I think it is going to be, I could date it way back to 2012, when I started graduate school in Kansas City, Missouri. I just want to share this story with you. So I had just come to the US, not going to mention the professor's name. So he tells me I have to write a paper. And this paper, and the paper I have to write, he just wants to see an introduction and a conclusion. And I'm like, an introduction and a conclusion? Well, I've never heard of this kind of paper. My father is a university professor. So I talked to my dad on the phone and I'm like, Dad, what kind of paper do you write with an introduction and a conclusion? Because I don't even know how to go about this kind of paper. So my dad is like, I don't understand. I don't know what your professor is expecting from you, but I won't tell you, I'm not going to tell you to listen to me. He's your professor. So whatever he has asked you to do, do it. But I want to see your grade after you write that paper. So I actually find a way to come up with a paper with an introduction and a conclusion. And this is sometime around December. I'm supposed to submit the paper before, because I was also preparing to go to Cameroon for vacation to spend the Christmas with my family. So I write this paper with an introduction and a conclusion, and I leave for Cameroon. So like 2 days, I think that was on sometime around the 22nd, I was already in Cameroon. I decided to go online to check my grade. And behold, this professor gave me a C in this paper. So I'm like, at the time I checked, I was in my room checking, I was in my room and my dad was in his office. So I run, I'm like, Dad, you see what I was telling you? This paper, he said I should write an introduction and a conclusion. Look, he gave me a C and I don't understand. It's like, I saw everything from the beginning. I knew there was something wrong with what your professor was asking you, because I've never heard of that kind of paper. So when people talk about colorism, probably this is the only experience that always comes to my mind vividly, because I don't know if my other course mates were told to write a paper with an introduction and a conclusion, just like me. I may have had other experiences, but like I said, I choose to give a blind eye to those experiences because probably because of my Christian faith too. I just don't like to look at things as, okay, it's probably racism or not, because I've also seen situations where people of the same color treat others, with a lot of disrespect, or with some kind of biased mind, So from that day, I found it difficult, listening to, maybe if probably a professor told me something that was not in line with writing a paper, with the concepts of writing a paper, I'll probably prefer to go and maybe consult my dad, maybe to maybe read my paper before I submit it, because I found it a little bit difficult, to believe my professors because of my experience. So that is my own little experience about colorism. But like I said, I don't really know if it was because of my color or every other person in that class was also told to write a paper with an introduction and a conclusion. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bolima. That I can understand how that would be a tough situation, and it's the whole thing about leveling the playing field, and I think that's what we're all looking for in this sense. So I'm going to move on to the next question, and our next question is: as a Black Indigenous person of color, what does inclusion mean to you? And I'm going to start with Maria this time.
Sure. let's see. I think I'm gonna talk about inclusion in terms of Black Lives Matter. Okay, so the movement Black Lives Matter, some people say that why do we have to talk about Black Lives Matter, right? Wouldn't Asians' lives matter too, or other white lives? Do they don't they matter too, right? So I think this is a great example to think about inclusion and what inclusion means. So for some people, inclusion means that we just have to include everybody, and we shouldn't put the spotlight on any race in particular or any ethnic groups because we are excluding other groups. But I looked online and I love this example. Let's say your house is on fire. Would you like the hose to be, putting out the fire of your house, or every other houses on your street, on your neighborhood too, because their houses are also important? Of course, you want them to put out the fire at your house. So I think what is coming at this understanding of, well, we have to be inclusive. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to talk about every single race at the same time. So we have to understand the meaning behind movements such as Black Lives Matter, or even more recently, standing in solidarity with Asian Americans and also Pacific Islanders. So what I like to, when I think about like inclusion, I like to think about in terms of equity, that there are some groups that have more privileges as a whole, and some groups lower in privileges, right? Lower in power. And it is about how do we raise these groups that are traditionally have been marginalized. And we do it in an inclusive manner such that we all jump in to help. There's always something that we can do, even though, for some of us, we may feel we are marginalized because of our culture or gender or sexual orientation or anything. There may be areas that we have the power and privilege, and how each of us can use our gifts for the greater good. So that is how I understand inclusion.
Definitely. I definitely agree with that, Maria. I think that people feel, I think the failure to understand is that saying that Black Lives Matter does not negate all the other lives that matter. It's just, it's saying that at this point, this is the movement because these are the lives that right now are being disrespected and being threatened most. I feel a lot like you, and I think my definition of inclusion will be a seat at the table. So we're all having a seat at the table, as opposed to, oh, this is like, just because I'm sitting here doesn't mean this is Jannny's table. I'm just sitting, Jannny is a member of this table. Like it's just as part of a whole. And like, representation, that's what matters. Jose, Bolima, do any of you want to jump in here?
Go ahead, Bolima.
Maybe you can go ahead and then I will.
Okay. No problem. Well, I take a different take in a sense because of my position within the Presbytery and my position as a pastor and call to ministry. I will say that in terms of inclusion, as has been mentioned, representation matters, and in the places that I have served previously, I was in northern Michigan, where it is a very homogenous, mostly white community area, part of the world, part of this country. And so I was I was a representative of the Hispanic community, Hispanic Latinx community to many Anglo people, right? I was the only exposure to to it. I was also a representation of immigration, because my parents were immigrants and I was the first one born here. In particular with the backdrop and context of the former president sharing his comments about immigrants and specifically Hispanic immigrants. I represented a different perspective, a different image of what immigration looked like, right? The product of of immigrants, a child of immigrants, and they go, really? You? Yeah. And to go back to what Maria was saying, we're not one story. We're not monolithic. We're not one, just because we fit into categories. And as Janny represented earlier, we share some similarities being Hispanic, Latinx peoples, but we're a little bit different. And culturally, we're different too, because Dominicans have their own wonderful, rich heritage and culture, as do Mexicans have our own rich culture. And so representation matters to the extent that we can be representatives of a particular demographic. So I represent the Hispanic Latin culture, but I, like Maria, always want to put that caveat that I'm not the end all be all. And in particular, I'm kind of a different representation because as a child of immigrants, this is sort of a new area that we're seeing this mix of American and Mexican cultures and fighting this tension with the heritage of our ancestors and family with the culture that we live in currently. So as best I can, I represent, but knowing full well that I can't fully represent everybody. But when it comes to inclusion, we do want to celebrate everyone and recognize that we're all this beautiful, and I could get into a theological discourse there too, to share some scripture with that, but we'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you very much, Jose. Well, in my experience, first of all, I would like to respond to a very interesting question that has been posed in the chat by Karen Brown about Africans coming here and prefer going to the white churches than the black churches. I want to think that, like I said, I'll be talking as an individual, but I can't talk for the whole group. But in my experience talking with Cameroonians and Africans as a whole, they all have the mindset that being an African American is synonymous to violence. Is that okay? They have that mindset. And why do I say that? I say that because some of them have spoken about their experiences in the workplace. You have some who will say they have been treated better by white superiors than the black superiors. That is what actually quite a good number of Africans have said. Is that okay? Now, when I talk about myself now I've worked in the workplace. I've had the experience of working with colleagues, fellow Black or African Americans. And I've had the opportunity to converse with them, to talk with them. And I came to realize that they're not actually violent, but sometimes it is their history that makes them to feel the way they feel. We coming from Africa don't know much about that history. A whole lot of people coming from Africa don't know about that history. And so that is why I try to tell a lot of Africans, You know, this thing between white people and African Americans in this country, I think you should play the role. It's better for you to play the role of a mediator because you don't actually know what the Africans have gone through. Just the other day, one of my colleagues was telling me, you know, your ancestors sold us to the white people. I told them, you know, if I had to tell you the story of how a lot of Africans were whisked out of Africa into the Western world, you wouldn't believe it. A lot of chiefs had to send those slaves at gunpoint. You know, they had to send out those slaves at gunpoint. So you can't really tell us that, and by the way, you can't really tell us because some of us probably didn't come, are not actually directly linked to those royal families. So you can't actually say that the blame, we are just lucky that our grandparents were not among those who were sent out for slavery. But you can't just see me and say our grandparents sent your grandparents out for slavery. No, a lot of chiefs, when you listen to the story of slave trade, especially from Africa, many chiefs had to give slaves at gunpoint. They had to sell these slaves at gunpoint. And because they couldn't fight back, they didn't have the technology, they didn't have probably the sophisticated guns that the white people had at the time. They had just the spears, the bow and arrows. They couldn't fight back. They couldn't fight back. So a whole lot of times you have Africans who would tell you, you know, I would prefer my child gets married to a white than gets married to a black, because I feel like the white people, they have they have a culture that is peaceful, that is synonymous to the black. And at some point, around the time I just came to this country, I almost had that belief. I almost had that belief. Now I even live in the black community. I've got to understand black people way better. I've got to understand black people way better. And it's not, to me, it's not just about the skin. It's not just about the skin color, but it's also about sometimes the kind of marginalization I think I face. I don't think it's just about my skin color, but it's actually probably because of my accent. I don't know if my white brothers, white folks and black folks on this forum understand me. I think it's actually because of my accent, because I have also seen situations where white people in the workplace have found it easier to be welcoming to the fellow black people with similar accents in the workplace than me because of my accent, probably because I come from Africa. Is that okay? So there's a whole lot, and just on Saturday coming up, I'll be graduating from McDaniel College, and my brother works in this place where he is going to be. They produce these hoodies, and he just texted me like I think about 3 hours ago, and he was telling me, "Do you want me to put the logo with the Black Graduates Matter?" And I was like, "No, I don't want that. I don't want that logo, because to me, all lives matter. That is how I feel. But sometimes I may not want to express this in a community of black people because they have their own grievances. And it's true. I identify with the grievances of the black people, but again, I also feel that white people have certain experiences they might want to talk about. And I don't also want anyone, like I said, like I just put it right here. There is a whole lot about the history in this country between white and black people that we coming from outside don't understand. So that is why I'm very, very careful when it comes to taking sides. But just to respond to Karen Brown's question, just what I've told you, a lot of Africans, those coming from Africa, think that African Americans are violent. And so that is why you see some of them even come when they leave, when they live in these communities for a while, they're already trying to find a way to leave, maybe to leave the community, to go find another place to live, because they're scared that their kids might, pick a culture that they don't want. I don't want to say a culture that is violent, because like I said, I don't think Blacks are as violent as many people think. I think they just have certain grievances that if those grievances are solved, they're going to be better people. Thank you.
Thank you, Bolima.
May I also respond?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I just want to say, to Bolima, in response to your comments, and thank you for sharing your experience with us, that everybody, right, including people of color, everybody, we have our own biases. These biases are sometimes automatic. We are not aware of them, or we internalize them from the society, right? The stereotypes of many cultural groups. We only have this brain size of this. We only have limited capacity, and there's so much going on in the world around us that we need to find shortcuts to quickly process information, right? And to make judgment of how we need to respond. But that's the reason why we have so many biases, and even for people of color, we have our own biases too. And I think it is so important to take time to reflect and think about our own biases and really think whether they are true or not. A lot of times they are not true, and think about what we can do about them. I just want to put that up on the table for us to think about.
Thank you, Maria. So I had two things for Bolima, and part of it, I think it is there's this perception that people believe what they see sometimes on TV, and the way that the narrative is spun. So if the narrative is spun where all you're showing is violence, like when they're talking about, for example, they're talking about, this many people died today in Chicago, and so all you're going to think is, all people are doing in Chicago is dying. Like, people are dying, like everywhere you turn, there's somebody dying. So it's important, like Maria said, reflect and take our time to look and to look into things and into cultures so we can learn the differences. And I do agree with you that we don't know what each culture's battle until we've been in it is. Like my experiences with racism is obviously not the same as yours, it's not the same as Jose and Maria's. And so it is important for us to try to put ourselves in the shoes of other people. So in order to understand what they're going through. And the other important thing that I love that you brought up was the accent thing, because the accent is such a big part. I don't know if it's that people think that when you have an accent, is it that sometimes I feel like people think you're not that smart. And also, or you don't understand properly. And like the way that I've experienced that kind of prejudice is like, if I'm on the phone with someone and my accent is a lot less thicker than it used to, but it's always going to be there. It's like a phonetic thing. So I remember like being somewhere where I'm explaining myself, and my Spanish at this point fails me most of the time. So I cannot, and they transfer me to a Spanish rep. And I'm like, look, I can't explain to you this in Spanish. As much Spanish as I know, like my wires cross. So like little things like that, like sometimes I know that it takes sometimes, like when an accent is very different from yours, but taking the time to listen to the person, and you will show, you'll find like you have an accent and you have a lot of insight, and I have an accent and I have a lot of insight. So thank you for bringing that up today. So we're going to move on with that to the next, to our third question of the evening. And it's some BIPOCs may not feel comfortable talking about race because they feel it's complaining. And so they may not engage in racial conversations. Some have experienced some unbearable episodes and experiences, so a lot of painful things. And that leads to, like, shutting down and avoidance and grief. Can any of you speak to that? Have you had any experiences with this? Jose, how would you feel about that?
Well, in terms of the question, I haven't experienced it too much in terms of my own cultural heritage, identity, my family. About not talking about race. What I will say though is that there is and can be, let's say, cultural racial bias even within other cultures that we wouldn't necessarily think of. So Hispanic, Latin X cultures, I remember, again, well-meaning, loving family members, some of my dearest aunts and uncles, I remember sharing, around the holidays, around the table, off-color jokes, because again, we're all light-skinned, jokes that, everyone, at a certain time would laugh at these jokes, but as a kid, it made an indelible mark in my head what kind of jokes they really were. And as I grew older, I realized, oh, those are not good jokes. They're racist jokes. So while I can't say that I personally experienced not engaging the race conversation intentionally, I think there's also unintentional ways. I didn't know that was racist. I didn't know that the similar kinds of things that we're seeing in white dominant cultures here in the US, that happens in other cultures as well. The other thing is that I was going to say is that there's also an element of a different element when you bring in cultures with immigrants or immigrant cultures. So this sense of not complaining very much aligns with the idea of you want to do the very best you can to fit in, to assimilate, to do what you're supposed to do, to get your education, all those different kinds of things, so as to not stand out, to not be isolated or singled out, but based on anything other than merit. So I experienced some of that in terms of my own sense of you got to do well in school, you got to be the good example, you got to be the model minority, is another term that we can use as well, right? So in that sense, you don't complain because you don't want to stick out. You want to fit in and do your best, so that not all the stereotypes hang on our family, right? That sort of thing. So that's another element to it as well. So it can be, and by the way, if we can point out that look at all of the different factors that go into this all these different questions in this conversation. There's so many factors that go into it, and that many of us who are a part of this, who consider ourselves or are BIPOC, we carry with us all the time. We can't get rid of it. It's part of our heritage and what makes us us, and so we carry that around, and so it becomes quite exhausting sometimes. So I'll stop there.
I would jump in as well. I'm just looking at the question again, and I think I will add to it that sometimes this is not just like one particular episode, right? One particular instance, but it could be microaggressions, right? Those invalidating, right? Consistent little moments, they add together, but then, the person who is experiencing those, right? Really, feel the hurt. So a common type of microaggression that I often receive because of my cute accent and my look as an Asian American is, where are you from? Now, the person asking may be very curious, right? And you understand that the person is not asking me like, which part of Maryland are you from? But really, what type of Asian are you? And this is an unfair question, right? Because the person usually does not ask other people as well. Definitely, they wouldn't ask white people, but they want to know, who I am, right? Where I'm coming from. But when you really think about it, right, there's an implicit message to that type of question. The implicit message is, you look different, you sound different, you do not belong, you are not one of us. And that is the part that really hurts. So for me to deal with those things, I usually like, oh, okay, you want to know where I'm from? Tell me about yourself. I would like to learn more about you. And then, depending on my mood, I may teach the person a lesson. Oh, you said that you're from Baltimore. Do you have an indigenous heritage? No. Okay, so which cultural heritage do you identify with? Right? I can be very snarky. Hopefully the person will get it. The first time that I received, or the first few times that I received these kind of comments, I usually didn't know how to respond, but I found that asking the person the same question, right, and asking more questions, would help. And I think for me, I would say that it helps to have allies. It really helps to have people who would listen to me and to offer validation and reassurance. I think one of my worst experiences of speaking about these type of situations, especially for microaggression, that a lot of times it is kind of ambiguous, right? What is, the intention of the person might be good, but you feel kind of like awkward, right? I think the worst thing that you can ever respond, right, when your friend tells you about this instance that they experience, is to dismiss it. Oh, you're just thinking too much. Oh, I'm sure the person is feeling does not feel that way. Why are you so sensitive, right? That is the worst thing that you can do. So really listen, acknowledge the fact that your friend is hurt, and to provide the support that they need. And sometimes we do not necessarily just shut down and internalize those feelings, right? We may feel angry. So again, offer your support to your friends, and really be present with us, with them, when we experience, when we have something to say about those experiences.
I 100% agree. Very well said. Very well said. And by the way, asking when somebody explains that something feels a little offensive or uncomfortable, and you say something like, you're being too sensitive, to me, that feels like a form of racial gaslighting, which is a complete no-no. But the one thing I wanted to add with this, the experience is like, and this is not my actual experience, but you see it in older people in our communities maybe. And it is that when they hear anything racial is going on, like there's a protest or this person didn't get treated right, they'll say things which like, well, I'm just here to work. I came here to work. So it's kind of like, I'm putting my head down and I'm going to work. And if you worked like I work, you wouldn't be having those problems. It's because like and you hear things like Black people have this attitude at work, or like, you know, and then like they'll talk about Hispanics like, oh, you know, you want yourself like, and Jose, I'm sorry, but like I'm gonna give the example, you want yourself a Mexican, like he'll come and he'll do his work, and like that's is generalizing at its best. Like we're generalizing that everybody is going to be different from a particular race, which is really severely not the case. But Jose, oh, Bolima, how about you? Would you like to jump in here? We may have lost Bolima. Nope, there he is. You're on mute. Bolima, I think we'll get back to you on this one. But Jose, you brought something really important, and it's about assimilation. Sometimes, like we all know what assimilation means. It's kind of like we get into the point where we're all kind of act the same, or like you're rolling yourself into a culture kind of a thing. And you know, sometimes as Christian brothers and sisters, being one in Christ can result in like a watered down version of the message, or kind of like, for lack of a better word, a whitewashing of it, ignoring differences instead of celebrating them. How do you feel we can avoid this? Maria? Well, oh, Jose, go ahead.
If you don't mind, I'll jump in here on this one, and I'll share some scripture with you, because this is one of my just a heart message for me. Quick story: when I was in seminary, I was in a New Testament course led by an African American professor, and we were in our we were reading our New Testament commentary. Is called True to Our Native Land, an African American commentary. It's a wonderful commentary. We were in the chapter in the book of Galatians, and I'm reading through, and we get to Galatians 3:28. Many of us are familiar with Galatians 3:28. We are no longer slave nor free, male nor female, and I'm butchering it, I apologize. We're no longer Jew nor Greek, male nor female. We are one in Christ. And the commentator, Brad Braxton, wrote that something that for me was just transformative. He says, you know what Paul was writing there, he said, Paul pleads for the eradication of dominance, not the erasure of difference. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. Paul pleads for the eradication of dominance, not the erasure of difference. So often we hear this, you know, this rallying cry, and it's fair on one level, this rallying cry to be one under God, one in Christ, that we are all the same. Well, that's not the whole story, right? That's one interpretation. And what Brad was talking about was this idea that, you know, the real gospel message is about eliminating these structures of dominance, not the erasure of difference. And so this pertains to assimilation, because assimilation is this idea that everyone has to fall in line and be exactly like the dominant culture. This happens with immigrants, particularly with Hispanic, Latinx immigrants, but other immigrants as well, where people say, this is America, we speak English here, don't speak Spanish anymore. And that's not fair, and that's not right. Because again, theologically, this is where we come in, and that scripture for me means that what the real issue, the real sin comes in these structures of dominance, of hierarchy that keeps us, that says, I'm different, you're different from me, therefore you're not as good. right? And rather, the end part of it says that we should celebrate our differences. Wow, Bolima speaks a different language than I do. Man, that's amazing. I should celebrate that. I can learn from him, right? That's what that means. And so the assimilation has been used as a tool and often gets misconstrued because, as Janny was pointing out, that the older generations say, just come here, put your head down, don't make waves, and fit in. And so that means assimilate, fit into the dominant culture. And what ends up happening is you lose some of your own sense of identity. But when we can hold on to that sense of identity of who we are, this grand mixture of all kinds of things, and in Spanish we say mestizaje, this mix of indigenous and Anglo and all these different kinds of things, that's a beautiful thing. And so assimilation has a very particular connotation in immigrant communities and in particular in Hispanic Latinx community.
Thank you, Jose. Yeah, I definitely can speak to that, and I definitely agree. How about you, Maria?
I agree as well. Beautifully said.
How about you,
Okay.
Bolima?
Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about the accent. In my own, if I want to talk about like my accent, like a lot of times, what I tell people is, I'm very proud of my accent, and part of the reason I talk the way I talk, and a whole lot of Africans would agree that our accent stems from the fact that we can speak more than one language. Is that okay? First of all, my parents come from the English side of Cameroon, but I was raised in the French side. Already that makes me bilingual. I can speak English and French. I can speak native language where my parents come from, okay? And I can speak we call Pidgin English. So already I can speak languages. We already have this level of diversity. A whole lot of people that come from places where they can speak more than one language find it very easy to learn a new language. Is that okay? So that is the beauty of my accent. At one time, because we have this thing in when I used to work in Baltimore in Baltimore County, where when you don't have a colleague in the class, you go into that class to substitute for your colleague. So I go into this class and I'm trying to talk to the kids. I'm trying to tell them to be calm or try to put them to order. And there is this child that tells me, "You got an accent," from the back of the class. Say, "You got an accent," and I'm like, "Yeah, I have an accent because I can speak more than one language." How many languages can you speak? You can speak just English. I can speak more than one language. So that is why I got an accent. And his classmates were like, "Oh," you know. So, but you see, when I spoke to another colleague, another friend of mine, who's a teacher who works with PG, he was like, "When that kid made that statement, why did you report the kid?" I said, "No, you don't have to report. You don't have to. There are just certain things you don't report these kids. You understand? Because I think after that day, when I made that statement, that young man and I became very good friends, like my class to check on me. So there are just certain ways you can respond to people without actually, without actually doing something that is going to make them, feel very bad. Because from that day on, there are certain things when he comes to my class, I just try to teach him one or two words in another language, so that at least he learns something new. And I don't know how other people feel about this, but that is just what I thought I could share.
I love that example, Bolima. That's such a neat example. I would also say that I love that, right? I would also say, it is so important that we be an advocate for others, for our, for our friends, people of color, or, particularly since we're talking about accent, colleagues, whose English is their second language. Because I think Jannny mentioned this earlier, that a lot of people, once they hear an accent, foreign accent, they assume that you are less intelligent. And translating to, the workplace, or even in a church setting, when there's a group of people working together, it means that when the person of color, or the person specifically with an accent, speaks, some people were not willing to listen, but they were more likely to listen to someone who is white and who is male. And so for us to really think about inclusion and equity, we have to fight for our brothers and sisters. And, perhaps, in that classroom example, if Bolima has a colleague in the classroom, the colleague can actually step in and to tell the kid, right, about it's so cool to learn so many different languages, and how many of you here also speak other languages, to raise that, right, to empower other children. So I just think, there's such beauty, so much work that we can do to support one another and to be a true advocate for others.
I agree, and thank you, Bolima. Yeah, that was a great example, and thank you, Maria, for your words. I want to add here, because I am a strong, I know that a lot of people feel like it shouldn't be up to me to teach other people. However, sometimes the way that I feel is, how would you learn if I don't teach you? So this moment, little moments like this are so important. For you to educate people. I remember when we were talking amongst ourselves the other day, I talked about how people are always like, oh, you're Puerto Rican. And I'm like, no, I'm Dominican. And they're like, so what's the difference? And I'm like, I could be angry about that, but I'm like, why? At this point is my opportunity to teach you that these are two different islands, two different countries. Puerto Rico is allied to the United States. Dominican Republic is a sovereign on its own. And for me to explain to you what the difference between are we very similar? Yes, we are. Our makeup is very completely similar. We just is a different nationality. But I think it's important for us to take that time and sometimes explain, because sometimes people are not overtly trying to be prejudiced against you. They just don't know. So taking that little extra time and explaining certain things, I think that could go a long way for a better understanding. We have only about 20 minutes left, so we wanted to give our audience any opportunity to ask any questions for the panel. If you all have any questions, you can please type it in the chat, or if you prefer to voice them out loud, we can unmute you. So please join the conversation. Go ahead. Go ahead, Susan. You can unmute yourself. You can. Frank, can you please? Are they?
Susan, your sound's really screwed up. You sound like Minnie Mouse.
So we celebrate you in your Minnie Mouse-ness.
That little arrow next to your mute button might give you some options to explore with your microphone.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Annette. Can I ask a question while Susan's getting on?
Sure, go right ahead.
I was just curious as a follow-up to Karen's question, in terms of the experience of others in countries that were colonized and the colonial experience, wasn't that somewhat akin to racism and violence? I mean, in the relationship with the colonial culture?
Annette, can I respond to you? Yes, I said I was going to respond to that. Okay. Actually, it was actually racism and violence, okay? Because you had, we also had staff quarters meant for white people where black people couldn't live.
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay? We had that level of segregation even in these areas, and then we even had something, and because a lot of Africans too were not educated at the time. A lot of Africans too were not educated at the time. There was something that white people used to do. It's just a vivid example. Like a white man could put, let's say on a farm, he could put his pair of glasses somewhere on something on a tool or a table, and tell black people to work, and tell them that these are his other pair of eyes, and that if any of them is not working, he is seeing them. And a lot of African people actually believed that, and they will work so hard thinking that those pair of glasses was a white man actually watching them. So you have a lot of these stories that, you know, that black people can tell you, but they would also tell you that one thing that the white man brought to the African community was their culture, was the beauty of their culture, which they also acknowledge. But there is something that is going on right now. Because a lot of African countries already feel that they are beginning to shift to the Western culture. There are certain things about the African culture that they are already losing. Now people are already very skeptical about that because we don't want to lose that culture. Is that okay? There is something about our African culture that we don't want to lose. And a lot of African parents and Africans as a whole are already particular about that. And this brings me to the whole point of institutional, how can I put it? I don't know if to call it institutional racism or something, but I don't want to call it racism or something, but it has more to do with how, I don't know how to put it, institutional bias or something, or post, let me call it post-colonization. It's some kind of post-colonization which a lot of Africans are trying to shift away from. Like there are just certain things about Western cultures that we don't feel that they should still be dominant over our culture. We can still maintain our culture, but still embrace certain aspects of Western culture without actually losing our culture. And this brings me to something, because I've been attending this decolonization study group. This decolonization study group. Now, when you attend the decolonization study group, it has a lot to do with all what I've been talking about here, like we not being accepted in the workplace, and the way we are, people of other cultures that come to the US are treated in the workplace. Now, there are just certain policies within the workplace that if they just have to change them, is going to make the workplace a whole lot better even for immigrants, or even for Black people as a whole. So it still looks like some kind of racism, but modern day, a modern form of racism that we are trying to shift away from. So, like for example, I'll be honest with you, this is a country where they rarely give people like we Africans, we have already said that it's a country where people are hardly given an opportunity for a second chance. I don't think that those are things that we need to change, because there are people who make mistakes in life. I feel that there are people who make mistakes in life. They probably go to jail. They come out, they are different. If we just give them a chance, to portray the beauty of the change that they've experienced, it's going to make things a whole lot better. So I don't know.
Thank you. We're worried about you driving and talking. You're being very passionate about your answers. Be careful.
Thank you. Susan, you want to try again? No, it's back. Do you want to put it in the chat? Thank you.
While Susan's typing, I wondered something that Bolima mentioned, his example, his story about the eyeglasses, reminded me, and I don't think that, we put that many, let's say, North Americans recognize that Latin America was colonized as well. We had a lot, a flourishing indigenous culture that was here before colonizers came in and did their horrible thing. So in some senses, many people don't recognize that is something that that Latin Americans still deal with and still have to figure out what to do with, right? And I'm one of those as an example. My heritage comes from Spain and Italy, but I also have indigenous blood in my family as well. So what do I do with all of that, right? Bolima's example of the glasses, as we've all heard, I believe many of us have heard the accounts of the colonizers coming in and tricking the natives because they thought that it was a providential thing from God, right? From the gods. Hey, these white people are coming in, and they didn't put up any or very much effort in defending themselves. And then, of course, the additional disease and so forth that really did tremendous damage. So there's a lot of that needs to be recognized and spoken about as well. So I just wanted to share that with you all.
Hong Kong is also was also a colony by the British, as a British colony before 1997. And when I grew up in Hong Kong, it was a British colony. So my family actually left Hong Kong 3 days before the handover back to China in 1997. So it was pretty wild. My mom planned it, so it was planned. But I remember as a kid, I watched the handover ceremony in Canada instead of in Hong Kong. It's interesting because oftentimes, colonialism is associated with like violence, right, and racism and power difference, all that. That is not so much my experience, because it was a pretty peaceful time, I would say, for most part, growing up in Hong Kong. And there were things that the British government did well in Hong Kong, such as setting up the education system, right? Setting up universities and bringing in, high quality healthcare, hospitals, right? And there were, and also churches, right? Missionaries. But when I think about like, what did I miss, right? There must be something wrong there, right? What's the downside? And I think that a big thing for me is the internalized white supremacy. That in Hong Kong, people tend to think white people are smarter, they are better. if you speak, a lot of people in Hong Kong are bilingual. We speak, well, maybe trilingual too. We speak our native language, which is Cantonese, which is different from Mandarin. So Mandarin is the official language in China. Some of us also speak Mandarin. I learned Mandarin in school, and then I watched probably too much TV things in Mandarin, Chinese, and also English, that all the kids in Hong Kong, they have to learn English. Is part of the curriculum. But I think, growing up in a colony, right, in that type of environment, I have really internalized that people, white people are smarter, are more competent, and there's also I would say there's also racism in Hong Kong, that maybe a better word will be biases, right, for people who are from Hong Kong against people who are from mainland China, and vice versa. And also for people people who grew up in Hong Kong, right, who are Chinese, to discriminate against other foreign people who there's a huge population of workers coming from the Philippines and Thailand and Indonesia, and a lot, for some, they practice different religion, right? They have different diets, that, those people are being discriminated, but there's not a lot of like advocacy or really, people speaking up for the marginalized group in Hong Kong. So I think that is interesting, and definitely have to do something about it.
Thank you, Maria. So we have 5 minutes, so I wanted to read Susan's question. She typed it on the chat. It says she's interested in about our church experiences. She appreciated Jose's sharing of scripture, but she's wondering if anyone in the panel has witnessed racial discrimination or cultural bias in worship, or perhaps in a meeting or other church activity. Go ahead, Jose.
Jannny, did you want to say something?
No, I was going to say that I have not. And as being a part of Hunting Ridge, I feel like it's been the complete opposite. I have never seen like a more welcome community so far. I love the fact that there are so many races and cultures mixed, and how like I love the way Pastor Deborah, and I'm not saying that because she's here, she kind of tries to bring everyone in and include everyone in the service. She had my mom reading. My mom doesn't even speak English, but she reads, she practices, and she participates, and it's a very it's very welcoming and refreshing to see. But go ahead, Jose.
That's wonderful, and so thankful that Pastor Deborah and I'm sure there are many out there that share that. Susan knows my story. We've had conversations, but where I've experienced discrimination, racism, not so much in worship, but in the institution of the church, the structures that we still have present within and I'm cradle Presbyterian. My family back in Mexico is Presbyterian as well. But I've experienced, racism within the institution, the way things are still set up, where the dominant culture gets to say, hey, you need to do this or you need to do that. And in particular, I'm work with a small new worshiping community, a Hispanic Latinx community. And we still have folks that, again, God bless them. They're well-meaning and well-intentioned, but some of the things that they do, they either gloss over some of our experiences and challenges that we face, or they think that, well, you need to be doing it our way and the way that I think that you should be doing things, and that sort of thing. And so, there's still racism and discrimination, and that capacity, which sometimes can be even more hurtful than the overt overt racism, because overt racism, you can just blow off and just say, well, forget that person. I'm not going to deal with them, you know. But when it really hurts is when people who are supposed to be advocates for you or for your community, who do things without even realizing how they affect the community or the people they're intending to support. So that's when it gets really frustrating. I also wonder, there's just one last thing. I also wonder when my legal name is Jose Heriberto Lopez-Chapa. When I apply to serve, to become a pastor of a church, are there pastor nominating committees that immediately look over and put aside my application simply because of my Spanish name? I think that still happens, you know, or at the very least, positions and I've been a part of conversations with Karen Brown, who's mentioned really great points of, you know, churches overlooking well-qualified people of color simply because they're not used to it. They couldn't fathom, they haven't thought about, or even in the most well-meaning congregations, they haven't ever considered having a person other than a person within their community come in and lead the congregation. So I think those kinds of things still happen. And so that's been my experience with that. So.
Thank you so much, Jose, for sharing that. And we are out of time, but we will be here tomorrow. So we're hoping that all of you will join us for tomorrow, and we can continue this wonderful discussion. Thank you so much to the panel. Thank you, Jose. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Bolima. Thank you to Annette and Pastor Deborah. And we will see you tomorrow.
I just wanted to close us out and thank you too, Jannny, for moderating and being very helpful in all of us getting more understanding, I think, tonight from your different perspectives. And I do want to just reiterate what Jannny said and remind you that we're meeting tomorrow night, same time, 6:30 to 8. And you use your same link this time and just come on right back on that same link and join us. And I'd like to challenge each of you who have joined us tonight to invite one more person to join you tomorrow night. I think that that person would be able to learn from our discussion tomorrow night, even though they missed tonight. And I would challenge each of you to bring one more person. I do know that Maria can't join us tomorrow night, so we thank you, especially Maria, and look forward to continually getting to know you going forward. With our closing tonight will be a prayer, and Jose Lopez-Chapa will be leading our prayer. Thank you, Jose.
Friends, let us join our hearts together in prayer. Let us pray. Amantísimo Padre Celestial, te damos gracias por la oportunidad de reunirnos esta noche en el compañerismo y la conversación. Te damos gracias por las voces y las perspectivas compartidas en este diálogo. Te damos gracias también, oh Señor, por quienes estuvieron aquí para escuchar y ser parte de la reunión. Te pedimos que este diálogo continúe para que podamos crecer en nuestro entendimiento y amor, de la manera en que nos llamas a amarnos unos a otros y amar a nuestro prójimo. Bendícenos, oh Señor, y guárdanos hasta que nos reunimos mañana. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for bringing us together this evening for fellowship and conversation. We give you thanks for the voices and the perspectives shared. We thank you for those who are here to listen and be a part of this dialogue. We ask, oh God, that this conversation may continue so that we can all grow in our understanding and love for each other in the way that you call us to love one another and love our neighbor. Bless us as we depart and keep us safe until we meet again tomorrow night. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Good night, everybody.
Amen.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.